Why does God let the faithful suffer while the ungodly prosper? There's a kind of pain that's hard to talk about, not because it's too deep, but because it feels too unfair. You gave your life to God. You changed. You let go of things you loved, things that once made you feel alive, because you believed He was worth more. You prayed. You stayed up late, crying silently. You tried to do the right thing. And still, things fell apart. Your heart broke, your job ended, your friendships cracked, your family drifted. And then, just when you thought it couldn't get worse, you looked around and saw the ones who don't care about God thriving. They don't pray. They don't seek. They don't even pause to ask if He's real. And yet, their lives look perfect. Their relationships are stable. Their money is growing. Their smiles are everywhere. And you're sitting there in silence, wondering if you made a mistake by being faithful. It's the question we're not supposed to ask. Is it even worth it? Is it worth loving God if nothing gets better? Is it worth obeying when obedience brings pain? Is it worth staying close when the blessings feel distant? Let me say something to you, honestly, gently. You're not the first one to ask this, and you're not alone. In Psalm 73, a man named Asaph, a worship leader, someone deeply devoted to God, wrote something that sounds shockingly like your thoughts. He said that when he looked at the wicked, he saw no pain in their lives. He said they seemed healthy, strong, free from struggle. Their eyes bulged with abundance. They mocked God and still increased in wealth. And then he said this, "Surely I have kept my heart pure in vain." In other words, was all this for nothing? Have you ever thought that? That maybe your faithfulness was wasted? That maybe your prayers were just echoing back at you? You're not crazy. You're not weak. You're not faithless. You're human. And Asaph felt it too. And let's not forget Job. Job didn't just serve God. He feared Him. He turned from evil. He was the example God used when speaking with the enemy. And yet, his life was crushed. His children died. His wealth disappeared. His body was covered in sores. His friends blamed him. His wife gave up. And God? God went silent. Job sat in ashes, scraping his wounds with broken pottery, and still trying to understand. He said, "I cry out to you, but you do not answer." And he wasn't being dramatic. He was being honest. Maybe that's where you are right now, crying out, but hearing nothing, watching people around you live without care, while you, the one who cares the most, are the one breaking the hardest. And maybe you've heard well-meaning voices saying, "God has a plan. Just trust more." Everything happens for a reason, but their words don't fix the ache. They don't stop the silence. They don't make the blessings feel any closer. So what do you do with this pain? With this question that sits in your soul like a stone? Why do the faithful suffer, while the indifferent seem to flourish? The truth? It's not a question that gets answered with a quick verse. It's one that gets answered by walking slowly, honestly, through the story of Scripture, and through the story of your life. Because if we keep reading Asaph's psalm, something changes. He says, "When I tried to understand all this, it troubled me deeply until I entered the sanctuary of God." It didn't make sense until he brought his pain into God's presence, not a perfect version of himself, not a clean or composed version, the real angry, confused version. And there, something shifted. He realized that what he was envying was fragile, that the lives of the wicked, though they seemed easy, were like slippery ground, that their success wasn't eternal, that their strength wasn't secure, that their joy was shallow. And he saw that while they had everything on the outside, they had nothing holding them on the inside. Meanwhile, he, though broken, was being held. He says, "Yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand." Even in his anger, even in his doubt, even in his envy, God was still holding him. Maybe that's what you need to hear right now, that it's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel confused. It's okay to ask why. God isn't afraid of your questions. He doesn't run from your doubt. He doesn't punish your honesty. In fact, he draws near to it. He says, just like he once said to Peter, "You do not understand now what I am doing, but later you will understand." And maybe that later isn't today. Maybe it's not next month. Maybe not even this year. But one day, when the dust settles, when the story unfolds, when the curtain pulls back, you'll see that what felt like absence was a hidden kind of love, one that stays when nothing else makes sense, one that holds you even when you don't feel it. Let's pause and be real. Even when you know the stories, even when you remember Asaph and Job, something inside still says, "But what about now? What about me?" It's one thing to believe God was faithful in the Bible. It's another to believe He's faithful in your story. When the rent is late, when the diagnosis is real, when your faith feels like it's hanging by a thread. So let's talk about that thread. Because sometimes the most powerful kind of faith isn't the one that moves mountains. It's the one that survives the waiting. Let's go back to a man who knew waiting, Joseph. When Joseph was young, God gave him dreams, visions of greatness. But what followed? Betrayal by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold as a slave, falsely accused, thrown into prison, forgotten. He was faithful. He resisted temptation. He served others. He interpreted dreams. And still, he stayed in a prison for 2 whole years after helping someone else go free. Imagine that, helping someone else find freedom, and then sitting back in your own cell, alone. Does that sound familiar? You encourage others. You serve. You pray for people. You believe in healing. But when it comes to your pain, nothing moves. Nothing shifts. It's easy to start believing the lie, "God must have skipped me. Maybe I'm not chosen." But Joseph wasn't skipped. He was being positioned. He didn't know that his prison was right next to Pharaoh's palace, and when the time came, in one single day, he was lifted from the dungeon and placed in command of a nation, not because he forced it, not because he performed, but because he waited. Waiting is hard, and even harder when others seem to be winning. You see people cutting corners and getting promoted. You see people who lie, cheat, manipulate, and they still get celebrated. Meanwhile, you stay honest and hidden. It can feel cruel. It can feel like God is rewarding the wrong ones. But the Bible is full of stories where the long path of faithfulness leads to a reward that's different, not always louder, not always richer, but deeper, lasting. Think about Jesus. He lived perfectly. He healed the sick. He fed the hungry. He spoke truth. And what did he get? He was rejected, mocked, beaten, crucified. Even as he hung on the cross, people mocked him by saying, "If you are the Son of God, come down." They thought pain proved weakness. They thought suffering meant failure. But Jesus knew something deeper. Obedience is not measured by comfort, it's measured by surrender, and the cross wasn't defeat. It was the greatest act of love history had ever seen. But to get there, he had to stay in the suffering, not escape it. Maybe that's you right now. You're on a cross you didn't choose. You're staying in a job that breaks you. You're holding on to a marriage that feels fragile. You're showing up for people who wouldn't do the same for you. And all around you, the ungodly seem to be coasting. But listen, Jesus didn't compare himself. He didn't look at Barabbas and say, "But why him and not me?" He looked at the Father. He said, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." That was his anchor. Not fairness, not explanation, just trust. Trust doesn't always come with clarity. Sometimes it comes with quiet. It means saying, "I don't know why the wicked are winning, but I know who holds the story." It means saying, "I don't understand today, but I know this isn't the whole book." And that's what Paul reminds us of when he writes, "Our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us." That means this season, this tearful, unfair, exhausting chapter, isn't the whole story. There's more coming. There's a kind of glory that only comes through fire. And while the ungodly may win for now, their victories are short. But yours are being built in silence, in secret, in suffering, and they will last. So what do you do now? You keep showing up, not because life makes sense, but because God is still God. You grieve, you question, you bring your raw heart into his presence, just like David did, just like Job, just like Jesus. And you wait, not for fairness, but for redemption. Because with God, nothing is wasted. Not the tears, not the long nights, not the silence. Even now, he's writing something bigger than what you can see. And one day, when you look back, you'll thank him not just for the blessings, but for what he built in you while you were breaking. There's something no one tells you when you decide to follow God. You might lose more than you gain at first. Not because God wants to punish you, not because he loves others more, but because what he's building in you can't be bought cheap. Let's talk about that for a minute. When we look at others, people who don't care about God but seem to thrive, we're tempted to believe they're the ones living the good life. Nice houses, smiling families, big accounts, freedom to do whatever they want. But here's the thing, success without surrender is a setup. It looks good now, but there's no anchor underneath it. That's not just poetry, it's biblical. Let's go back to Psalm 37. David, anointed, chosen, and yet constantly hunted, wrote this: "Do not fret because of those who do evil, for like the grass they will soon wither." He wasn't being naive. He knew the pain of injustice. He knew what it felt like to hide in caves while wicked kings feasted in palaces. But he also knew this: time exposes everything, and what grows fast often fades faster. You don't want roots made of applause. You don't want joy that depends on circumstance. You don't want peace that crumbles in crisis. And that's what God is offering you instead. It doesn't look shiny now. It might not come with claps or cameras, but it lasts, because what God builds in suffering, he never wastes. He's not just shaping your future, he's shaping your soul. Let's talk about another man who wrestled with this, Jeremiah. They called him the weeping prophet. Why? Because he obeyed God fully, and yet his life was full of rejection, heartbreak, and deep loneliness. He was mocked, beaten, imprisoned, left to sink in mud, all for speaking the truth. He once cried out to God, "Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why do all the faithless live at ease?" Sound familiar? But God didn't rebuke him. He didn't say, just have more faith. He let Jeremiah feel it, because real faith allows space for sorrow, and maybe that's what you need today. Not a solution, not a sermon, just permission. Permission to feel what you feel, to stop pretending, to cry in God's presence without shame, because sometimes pain isn't a sign that God left. It's a sign that He's holding something sacred. He's not rushing your healing. He's not comparing your tears to someone else's timeline. He's just with you, in the quiet, in the ache, in the parts of your story no one else sees. So what do we do when the wicked flourish? We don't pretend it doesn't hurt. We don't cover our questions with spiritual cliches. We let the tension sit. And in that tension, we choose to stay. Just like Ruth stayed with Naomi, just like Paul stayed in prison, just like Jesus stayed on the cross, because staying, even when it feels unfair, is sometimes the loudest act of worship. God sees what others can't. He rewards what the world ignores. And sometimes, His greatest blessings aren't things you hold, but people you become. The world gives you things. God gives you depth. The world promotes image. God transforms identity. The world celebrates comfort. God develops character. And in the long run, only one of those lasts. So maybe your story isn't loud right now. Maybe your life doesn't feel like a testimony yet, but it will. Not because you forced it, but because the God who began it never leaves things unfinished. The ungodly may rise quickly, but they fall just as fast. But you're rising slowly, quietly, deeply. And one day, when the fog lifts, when the pain becomes purpose, when your tears become wisdom, you'll stand. And you won't just be grateful for the victory, you'll be grateful for who you became on the way there. Let's talk about time, because part of what makes this question so painful, why do the ungodly prosper, is that it feels like they're ahead. They're building, they're buying, they're getting married, they're moving forward. And you're sitting in the same place, wondering if God forgot to turn your page. But time with God is different. It doesn't rush. It doesn't reward shortcuts. It doesn't measure value by milestones. It measures it by formation. Let's go back to Moses. He was called to lead a nation, to stand up to Pharaoh, to part seas, to carry commandments from God Himself. But before all that, he spent 40 years in a desert, not preaching, not leading, just watching sheep. Imagine knowing you have a call on your life and spending decades doing something that looks like a detour. But it wasn't a detour. It was a refining. Because what God wanted to do through Moses, He first had to do inside him. And it took time. That's what makes comparison so dangerous. When you look at others, especially those who don't care about God, and they seem ahead of you, you begin to question your pace, your faith, your story. But what if their speed is not a sign of blessing, but a sign of shallowness? A tree that grows fast with shallow roots falls in the first storm, but a tree that grows slowly, letting its roots go deep into hidden soil, survives everything. Maybe that's what God is doing in you. Let's be honest though, deep doesn't feel good. It feels slow, invisible, lonely. You're not celebrated for deep roots. You're not applauded for inner growth. But heaven notices. Heaven watches when you stay faithful in the unseen, when you love without being loved back, when you serve without being thanked, when you give without receiving, when you hope in silence. That's the kind of faith that doesn't just move mountains, it outlasts them. Remember Hannah? She longed for a child. She prayed through tears. Meanwhile, her husband's other wife, Peninnah, had children and mocked her pain. From the outside, it looked like Peninnah was blessed, fruitful, secure, but it was Hannah's womb that would carry Samuel, a prophet who would anoint kings. Her pain wasn't wasted. Her delay wasn't punishment. It was preparation for destiny. And when the time came, Hannah didn't just receive a child. She gave him back. Because when God blesses you after a long season of breaking, you love differently. You give differently. You worship differently. Maybe that's the quiet miracle happening in you right now. Not the kind you can post, not the kind people applaud, but the kind where your hands start opening, your soul softens, and your roots go deeper into the one who doesn't change. Because at the end of the day, God isn't forming you for a moment. He's forming you for eternity, and eternity doesn't rush. Jesus once said, "What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet lose their soul?" That's what the ungodly are risking. They may look like they've gained everything, but they're building on sand. You're building on rock, even if it feels slow, even if no one sees, even if it hurts. And when the winds come, and they will come, your life won't collapse because it's not built on applause, on wealth, on success. It's built on someone who already overcame the world. So what do you do when others pass you by? You bless them, you release them, and then you refocus. You remember what Paul said, "Let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." Proper time, not their time, not social media time, not even your time, but God's. And in that time, you will see that what he was doing in the dark was more powerful than anything built in the spotlight. You just have to hold on. You've made it this far. Through the silence, through the questions, through the nights when God felt far and life felt unfair, and maybe something in you still aches, still watches the world with tired eyes, still wonders why others rise while you remain in the shadows. But maybe, just maybe, you're starting to see that shadows don't mean God is absent. Sometimes they mean you're standing close to something holy. Let's talk about another story, one often forgotten. A man named Zechariah, a faithful priest. He and his wife Elizabeth were both righteous before God, obedient, devoted, but they had no child, and they were well past the age of hope. For years they prayed. For years, they waited, and nothing happened. And yet, the Bible says they were still serving, still showing up, still lighting the incense, still being faithful when it didn't feel fruitful. And one day, in the middle of the ordinary, God sent an angel. Not when Zechariah was weeping, not when he was begging, but when he was doing what he had always done. Maybe that's a word for you. Maybe your breakthrough won't come in the moment of emotional desperation, but in the quiet, obedient stillness. When you're folding laundry, when you're answering emails, when you're praying the same prayer for the 100th time. That's where heaven breaks in, because your obedience is not invisible to God. Your consistency is not wasted. Sometimes the people who look blessed today aren't really winning. They're just loud. But faithfulness has a sound too, quieter, deeper, longer lasting. It shows up when you wake up to another ordinary morning and still choose to trust, still choose to pray, still choose to forgive. Let's talk about Paul. He gave everything for the gospel, and yet he was shipwrecked, beaten, imprisoned, abandoned. He even said at one point, "We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, struck down, but not destroyed." Paul didn't have an easy life, but he had an anchored one because he knew something deeper. It's better to suffer in the truth than to succeed in a lie. And sometimes the very wounds you wish would go away are the ones that make your life meaningful. Think of Jacob. He wrestled with God. He walked away limping. But that limp, it was a mark of encounter. It was the reminder, I saw God and I lived. You may not see your limp as holy, but in heaven's view it's glory. It means you fought through the night. It means you've dared to say, I won't let go until you bless me. And God loves that kind of faith, the kind that stays, the kind that limps, the kind that refuses to pretend everything's okay just to keep up with people who never cared about truth to begin with. Let's come back to your question. Why does God let the faithful suffer while the ungodly prosper? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Because He's playing the long game. God isn't just interested in making your life work. He's interested in making your life matter. And that kind of life takes fire, takes pressure, takes seasons where you feel alone, but aren't. Because He is refining you, not punishing, not ignoring, refining. And He only refines what's valuable. You might say, but it's not fair. And you're right, grace never was. It's not fair that Jesus died for people who mocked Him. It's not fair that mercy comes to those who least deserve it. It's not fair that the first become last, and the last become chosen. But it's beautiful, and it's holy, and it's the way of the kingdom. So maybe God has let you suffer, not because He forgot you, but because He's trusting you, trusting that you'll carry something others can't, that you'll understand a kind of love others never will, because only those who break know what it means to be healed by grace, and only those who wait in silence know how to hear the whisper of God. So what now? You keep going. You cry if you need to. You question if you must. But don't let the success of others steal the sacredness of your journey. Because God isn't measuring your life by their noise. He's measuring depth. And every tear, every long night, every quiet yes is storing up a weight of glory that no one can see yet. But one day they will, and so will you. By now, maybe you've stopped expecting easy answers. Maybe you've realized this journey isn't about solving the question, but surviving it. And not just surviving, but becoming something stronger because of it. Let's talk about what that might look like. We've spent time in the Psalms, in Job, in Paul, but there's another voice in Scripture that carries this tension so clearly, Habakkuk. He was a prophet, not to the people, but with the people. He looked around and saw injustice, corruption, pain. He didn't stand above it with a sermon. He sat in it with a question. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? In other words, God, why are you silent when the wicked win? Sound familiar? But here's what makes Habakkuk different. He didn't run from the question, and God didn't reject him for asking it. God responded, not with a quick fix, not with a step-by-step plan, but with a perspective shift. God told him, I am doing something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. What if that's what God is saying to you too? What if the pain you see is part of a plan you can't yet imagine? What if the silence isn't abandonment, but the slow unfolding of something eternal? And then, at the end of all the questioning, Habakkuk prays something radical. He says, though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. Not because things got better, not because God explained himself, but because something in Habakkuk changed. Not the circumstances, the perspective, That's the turning point for many of us. Not when the wicked are stopped, not when the blessings start showing up, but when we choose to believe that God is still good, even when nothing looks like it. That's not weakness. That's not surrendering to pain. That's spiritual resilience, the kind that makes hell tremble, the kind that heaven applauds, the kind that doesn't need proof to believe, just presence. And here's where things start to get redemptive. Because if you've suffered, if you've cried over injustice, if you've stayed faithful when others didn't even care, you're now carrying something the world desperately needs: compassion. You've learned how to see pain. You've learned how to stay with people who are suffering. You've learned how to feel, not just perform. The ungodly may succeed in public, but you've grown in private. And that growth, it makes you safe. God doesn't use perfect people. He uses formed people. People who've walked through fire and stayed soft. Think about Peter. He denied Jesus 3 times. And after the resurrection, Jesus didn't shame him. He asked one question 3 times. Do you love me? And each time Peter said yes, Jesus didn't say, then go preach. He said, then feed my sheep. Because love leads to service, and brokenness makes your love real. So maybe that's where this all ends. Not with answers, but with a calling. Maybe you've been asking, why do the wicked win? But now God is gently asking, will you still love me? Even if the fig tree doesn't bloom? Even if the questions stay open? And if your answer is even a whisper, yes, Lord, I still want you, then you're already winning, because that's what heaven is watching for. The world measures success in outcomes. God measures it in surrender, and in that surrender, your suffering becomes sacred. Your waiting becomes worship. Your tears become seeds. And the harvest? It may not look like theirs. It may never make headlines, but it will matter in eternity. So what now? You live honestly. You walk humbly. You stay with God, even when you don't understand Him. You let your story, this slow, holy, breaking story, become a light for someone else who's drowning in silence. And one day, you'll look back and say, now I understand what He was doing, even when I didn't feel Him, because He never left. He was writing redemption in the spaces you thought were empty. By now, you've probably stopped comparing yourself, not because life got easier, but because your heart started to shift. You stopped asking, why do they have more? And started asking, what is God doing in me? That shift, it's everything. It means the pain didn't win, the bitterness didn't root, the darkness didn't swallow you whole. You're still here, still breathing, still walking toward the God who felt absent, but never was. And maybe, just maybe, you've begun to understand something sacred, that the prosperity of the wicked is temporary, but the depth of the faithful is eternal. Let's be honest. There are people who look like they've won. They skipped corners. They bent rules. They ignored conviction. And for a season, it worked. But if you look closer, what they built came at a cost. They gained power, but lost peace. They gained wealth, but lost wisdom. They gained status, but lost soul. Jesus once said something radical. They have received their reward. In other words, what they got is all they'll get. But you're storing up something bigger. Let's go deeper. Jesus told a parable once about a man who built his house on the sand. It looked fine, until the storm came, and another man who built on rock. That second house, it took longer. It wasn't flashy. Maybe people laughed at him along the way, but when the storm hit, only one house stood. God isn't just giving you a story, He's giving you a foundation. And that takes time, that takes pressure, that takes storms. Let's be even more personal. Look at Jesus. He walked through cities filled with sinners. He saw tax collectors feasting in mansions. He saw Pharisees honored in public squares. He saw people prosper who didn't love His Father, and yet He didn't chase their status. He didn't fight for their platforms. He knelt, He served, He wept, He bled. And in the world's eyes, He lost. A criminal's death, abandoned, mocked, buried in someone else's tomb. But 3 days later, heaven proved what earth couldn't see. The tomb was empty, and the throne was filled. That's your hope. Not that your life will look shiny, not that justice will come quickly, but that resurrection is real, and it always follows crucifixion. Maybe what you're living right now feels like death, loss, silence. But resurrection doesn't begin with light. It begins in the dark. Think of the seed. It gets buried, covered in dirt, alone, invisible. But inside that quiet grave, life starts to stir. Roots reach down. Then, slowly, growth breaks the surface. That might be you. You're not dead. You're not buried and forgotten. You're planted, and God is tending to you in the silence. So what does it mean to prosper in God's eyes? It's not money, not followers, not perfect circumstances. It's peace in the storm. It's love that forgives. It's strength that survives. It's fruit grown in hidden places that feeds others later. Jesus said, I chose you and appointed you to bear fruit, fruit that will last. That's what you're becoming. And maybe years from now, someone will sit across from you with their own questions. And you'll listen quietly. You won't preach. You'll remember. And then you'll say, I once wondered the same. I once asked why God let the wicked rise while I stayed low. But now I see. He wasn't punishing me. He was preparing me. And in that moment, your pain will become someone else's healing. That's how God works. He turns ashes into stories. He turns suffering into wisdom. He turns weakness into witness. And the ungodly, they'll fade, not because you curse them, but because shallow things never last. But you'll remain, because you didn't chase what looked good. You followed the one who is good. And that's the only prosperity that never ends. Let's take a breath here. You've walked a long way with this question. You didn't just ask it once and move on. You carried it. You wrestled with it. You lived in the tension of it. And now, maybe the question hasn't disappeared, but your heart feels steadier because something shifted. Not the world, not the wicked, not the wounds, but you. You're seeing differently now. At the start you asked, why does God let the faithful suffer while the ungodly seem to prosper? But now, maybe you're asking a better question. What kind of person am I becoming through this? Because sometimes the point isn't to answer the why. It's to become the kind of person who can carry the weight of glory when it comes. Let's talk about eternity. Not as a far-off dream, but as a lens to see the present. Because one of the enemy's greatest tactics is to keep your eyes glued to the now. He wants you to measure your value by what you see. How many blessings? How much success? How easy is life? But Scripture constantly redirects our focus. Paul writes, "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." He's not saying your pain is small. He's saying eternity is massive. So massive that one day you'll look back on your hardest seasons with eyes full of understanding, not because they were easy, but because they were purposeful. Let me paint a picture. Imagine a scale. On one side, you're suffering. On the other side, what God is preparing. In this life, the scale looks uneven. The pain feels heavier. But in eternity, the weight of what God gives you will tip the scale so hard that your sorrow won't vanish. It will be redeemed. And that's the difference. The wicked may look like they're winning, but their gain dies with them. Yours meets you in eternity and keeps on blooming. Jesus once told a parable about a rich man and a beggar named Lazarus. The rich man lived in comfort every day. Lazarus sat outside his gate, hungry, sick, ignored. But when both died, everything flipped. Lazarus was comforted. The rich man was tormented, and no amount of money, power, or success could change the eternal outcome. The point? This life is not the measure of your worth. It's the testing ground for your heart. That doesn't mean your pain doesn't matter. It means it matters more than you think, because every tear you cry here echoes in heaven. Every time you stay faithful here adds weight to your crown. Every time you choose love over bitterness, forgiveness over revenge, truth over applause, you're investing in forever. And that's a prosperity no thief can steal, no crisis can shake, no injustice can cancel. You might say, but I want to see something now. And that's fair. God isn't asking you to live numb. He understands your ache for a glimpse, a sign, a moment of beauty. And sometimes He gives it. Sometimes He whispers through a sunset, or a kind word from someone unexpected, or a moment of stillness that says, I see you, keep going. Those moments are real, but they're not the finish line. They're reminders, postcards from home, telling you you're on the right road. You're not crazy for feeling tired. You're not weak for having questions. You're not broken for feeling unseen. You're human, and more than that, you're becoming holy, not because you're perfect, but because you're trusting a perfect God in an imperfect world. That trust? It's building something stronger than comfort. It's building character. It's building hope. It's building a testimony. And one day, when all the books are opened, when every secret thing is revealed, when every tear is counted, you'll hear the only words that will ever matter. Well done, good and faithful servant. Not because you had all the answers, not because you always felt strong, but because you didn't quit. You stayed. You believed, even when it hurt, even when others had more, even when it didn't make sense. And that faith, that quiet, trembling, stubborn faith, was more beautiful to God than you will ever understand. So here we are. After all the questions, all the prayers, all the silent moments where you felt forgotten, you've walked the valley. You've faced the tension. You've asked what many are too afraid to speak out loud. Why does God let the faithful suffer while those who ignore Him seem to thrive? You didn't rush to find a clean answer. You sat with it. You let it hurt. And in doing so, you became someone different, someone deeper, someone real, someone who knows what it means to carry unanswered prayers with open hands. Maybe you're still waiting, still hoping, still watching others succeed while your own dreams move slowly. And maybe, some days, you still feel the sting of that. That's okay. Even Jesus, resurrected and glorified, still had scars. Scars don't mean you failed. They mean you healed. And sometimes they mean you're still healing. Let's revisit the question one last time, not as a student, but as someone who has lived it. Why does God allow the faithful to break while the faithless seem to be blessed? The answer? Because this world is not the reward. It never was. You weren't created to be comfortable here. You were created to reflect someone eternal. That means your suffering is not a detour. It's part of the formation. It means your waiting is not wasted. It's preparing you. It means the prosperity of the wicked is not something to envy. It's something to pray over, because it may be the only reward they'll ever taste. But you have something better. You have a story that is still being written by a God who never forgets a single page. And what's more beautiful than answers? Peace without them. There's a kind of quiet confidence that only comes from walking through fire and finding God in the flames, not the God of quick fixes, not the God of easy roads, but the God who sits in the dirt with you and says, I know. I've been here too. You're not alone. That's who you're following. Not a God of reward points and performance charts, but a God of slow, faithful, hidden transformation. And because of that, you're not behind. You're not being punished. You're becoming someone who can carry eternity in their chest without exploding. Someone who can walk into broken places and carry hope, not because they memorized a verse, but because they lived it. Maybe that's what the world needs most right now. Not more experts, not louder voices, but people who've suffered well. People who've learned how to love when love wasn't returned. People who've stayed when they had every reason to run. That's you. And the prosperity of the wicked? Let it pass. Their celebration is short. Yours is eternal. So what now? You walk forward. Not because everything is fixed, but because your eyes are different. You know what matters now. You know what lasts. You know the value of a quiet soul and a rooted heart. And when the world rushes by, shouting about success, posting their trophies, boasting about their victories, you'll smile, not because you won, but because you've already been found. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to catch up. You don't need to beg for what others chase. You have God, and having Him means you already have more than the world could ever offer. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." He didn't say maybe. He didn't say someday. He said will. And He meant it. So let the ungodly have their spotlight. Let them dance for a season. But you carry light. You carry heaven. You carry the heart of the one who turned suffering into salvation. And that changes everything. You've walked through shadows. You've stayed in storms. You've cried honest tears. You've let the silence shape you. And now you walk forward with peace, because the one who was with you in the fire will be with you in the future. And He, not the wicked, writes the ending. And it's good.